Journey to Inner Peace, exploring the four pillars of noble wisdom. In a style reminiscent of Ananda, let us embark on a journey of profound contemplation and inquiry. Envision a realm where the concept of problems dissolves into the vastness of the universe. Could it be that what we perceive as problems are merely reflections of a world not aligning with our individual desires? In the grand tapestry of existence, might everything unfold just as it is meant to? Consider, for a moment, the liberation in detaching from the identity tied to our physical selves, from the intricate dance of our thoughts. Where, in this vast expanse of consciousness, do problems truly reside? This body, this remarkable vessel, it needs care, yes, but should it command our entire focus? Nourishing it, nurturing it, yet not allowing it to shape our entire being. Ponder the essence of pure awareness that weaves through the cosmos. This consciousness is untouched by turmoil, by dissonance. And how wondrous it is to recognize that we are an integral part of this boundless awareness. As we traverse the path of self-realization, we encounter beautiful paradoxes. Consider the enigma of dreams and visions in the enlightened. To dream, to see visions, suggests a self to experience them. Yet, in enlightenment, is there a self to perceive these dreams? This body, a mere vessel, might still experience dreams and visions, but who is the dreamer? Imagine, if you will, a state where the boundaries between waking, dreaming, and visionary experiences blur. In this state, one becomes an observer, watching these phenomena unfold, yet not entangled in them. In this elevated perspective, all states of being converge into one, a harmonious blend of experiences observed from a place of detached awareness. In the style of Ananda's teachings, let us delve into the essence of this profound experience and its implications on the journey towards self-realization. Imagine, if you will, a series of dreams, where even the most unexpected figures, like the Queen of England, find their way into the tranquil setting of a spiritual gathering. These dreams, recurring and vivid, carry within them a deeper symbolism, perhaps a reflection of the universal appeal of spiritual seeking, transcending boundaries and titles. Then, consider the vision of a sacred pilgrimage, not through physical landscapes but through the inner realms of consciousness. The journey to Aranakula, a hallowed mountain, becomes a metaphor for the inward journey each of us undertakes. In this vision, the mountain is hollow, symbolizing perhaps the emptiness of material pursuits. The journey leads to a center of brilliant light, representing the ultimate truth, the purest form of consciousness. In this vision, meeting figures like Ramana, Jesus, Ramakrishna, Nisargadatta, and Lao Tse signifies a union with the universal wisdom they embody. The melting into one light, followed by a blinding explosion, symbolizes the dissolution of individual ego and the awakening to a state of oneness with the universe. The subsequent vision, set in an idyllic field, furthers this narrative. Sitting among bodhisattvas and mahasattvas, there is a realization of having become the Buddha. This is not just a transformation of identity but a profound realization of the Buddha nature that resides within all. In this state of elevated consciousness, the teaching of self-realization of noble wisdom flows effortlessly. This brings us to the heart of the matter, understanding the signs of nearing self-realization. The first principle speaks volumes, the realization that everything in the universe emanates from the mind. This isn't a mere intellectual understanding but a deep, intuitive knowing. It's a state where the external world is seen as a manifestation of one's inner consciousness. Reflect on this. What occupies your thoughts throughout the day? Fears, worries, perceptions of lack or limitation are signs of attachment to false imaginations, a divergence from the understanding that these are mere projections of the mind. In essence, these visions and teachings invite us to contemplate our own journey towards self-realization. They challenge us to look beyond the superficial layers of our existence and to recognize the profound truth that we are, in our very essence, connected to the infinite wisdom of the universe. Principle number 1, the illusion of the external world as a manifestation of the mind. This principle invites you to embrace the idea that everything you perceive, the entire universe, its beings, and phenomena, are projections of your own mind. This realization comes not from forced thought but from a deep, intuitive understanding. It suggests that when you fear, worry, or feel lack, you are engulfed in the illusion, for these are mere creations of your mind. The key is to recognize that your true self is separate from these mental constructs. Principle number 2, the realization of being unborn. This principle delves into the understanding that your true self is beyond birth, life, and death. It is not a part of the cycle that the physical world subscribes to. This realization is pivotal in understanding that you exist beyond physical form, as pure intelligence, absolute reality, Satchidananda, existence consciousness bliss. You are the eternal I Am, beyond the limitations of physical existence. Principle number 3, understanding the egolessness of all things. This principle emphasizes the non-existence of ego in everything, not just in sentient beings but also in the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms. Recognizing this egolessness means seeing the sacredness in all things, understanding that everything is an expression of the divine. In the absence of ego, reverence for all life and existence becomes natural, and everything is perceived as an embodiment of what we call God. Principle number 4, understanding self-realization of noble wisdom. This principle revolves around the recognition of what self-realization is not. It involves a process of negation, where one systematically understands that they are not their body, mind, thoughts, or any physical or mental construct. What remains after this process of elimination is a state of emptiness or nirvana, a realization of oneness with the ultimate reality. This principle guides one to understand self-realization by discerning and disengaging from what they are not, leading to a realization of their true nature. These principles, deeply rooted in spiritual wisdom, guide one towards a profound realization of one's true nature. They encourage a shift in perspective, from identifying with the physical and mental constructs to recognizing the inherent divinity and interconnectedness of all existence. This shift leads to a state of pure happiness, unburdened by worldly attachments and illusions, and a deeper understanding of the universe as a reflection of the self. Collective vision and mind projection. The discussion also touches upon the collective nature of perception and reality. It suggests that our collective experiences and perceptions are shaped by habit energy, the cumulative effects of our beliefs and experiences. This shared perception creates a sense of a unified reality, even though it's a projection of the collective mind. The nature of existence and non-existence. There's an exploration of the concepts of existence and non-existence. The teachings suggest that in the ultimate reality, the concepts of birth, life, and death are irrelevant. Our true nature exists beyond these constructs. This understanding transcends the idea of being and non-being, leading to a realization that our true essence is beyond the dualities of existence and non-existence. The role of the mind. The teachings point to the mind as the source of all projections and experiences. However, they also suggest that the mind, as we understand it, doesn't truly exist in the ultimate sense. This paradox highlights the intricate nature of reality and perception, where what we perceive as real is merely a projection of a mind that itself is an illusory concept. In summary, these principles and discussions aim to guide one towards a profound understanding of their true nature, beyond the limitations of ego, physical form, and mental constructs, leading to a realization of oneness with the absolute reality. The mind as the projector of the universe. The notion that the mind projects the entire universe is central to these teachings. It suggests that the problems and experiences we perceive in the world are constructs of the mind. By transcending the mind, we can dissolve these illusions, revealing the underlying state of beauty, joy, and bliss. This perspective challenges the conventional understanding of reality, positioning the mind as the creator of our experienced world. The concept of false imagination. The discussion around false imagination implies that our perception of the world, including our egos and individual identities, is a form of illusion or dream. This aligns with the idea that what we perceive as reality is merely a projection, similar to a mirage or an illusion, and not an objective truth. Understanding self-realization and noble wisdom. The distinction between self-realization and noble wisdom is explored, emphasizing that true understanding comes from knowing what self-realization is not. This process of negation, symbolized by the term neti-neti, not this, leads to the realization that our true nature is beyond all tangible and intangible entities we can conceive. The mind's resistance to annihilation. There's a poignant discussion about the mind's nature to resist its own annihilation, as it is intrinsically driven to survive and maintain control. This survival instinct is likened to the ego's desire to persist, highlighting the challenges faced in the journey towards self-realization. Meditation and mindfulness. The role of meditation and mindfulness is discussed, not as a tool for change, but as a means for observation and awareness. The emphasis is on observing thoughts and experiences without judgment or effort to change them. This mindful awareness helps in dissipating the illusions created by the mind, leading to a clearer understanding of one's true nature. Acceptance versus observation. The teachings differentiate between acceptance and observation. Rather than accepting every thought or experience, the emphasis is on observing them without judgment or reaction. This non-reactive observation allows one to detach from the mind's projections and see the true nature of reality. In summary, these teachings offer a path to understanding the true nature of self and reality by transcending the mind and its projections, realizing the illusory nature of ego and individual identity, and embracing a state of mindful observation. This path leads to a realization of the fundamental emptiness and interconnectedness of all existence. Physical comforts and spiritual focus. The conversation about the fan highlights a common spiritual debate, whether physical comforts and attention to the body distract from spiritual focus. The suggestion to turn off the fan to avoid distraction reflects a viewpoint that physical comfort might reinforce the reality of the body, thus detracting from spiritual pursuits. However, the counterargument presented is that discomfort could be more distracting, as it might cause more focus on the body. Methods for spiritual progress. The dialogue then shifts to methods of spiritual practice. Self-surrender. This method involves complete surrender to God or the self. It's described as challenging because it requires relinquishing control and ego, and trusting every aspect of life to a higher power. Mindfulness. Becoming the witness to one's thoughts and actions, both in meditation and daily life. This approach emphasizes observation without judgment or the need to change anything. Self-inquiry. This method involves a deep questioning of the self, who experiences troubles, karma, or suffering. It is about tracing back the I to its source to understand one's true nature. The challenge of communication. The difficulty of using words to convey spiritual teachings is acknowledged. Words are seen as limited in their ability to capture the essence of spiritual truths, which are more effectively communicated and understood in silence. This highlights the limitations of language in spiritual discourse and the value of experiential understanding. Living a conscious life. Finally, there is an emphasis on becoming a conscious being, which involves being loving, compassionate, and gentle. It's noted that giving up egocentric views leads to a better life, contradicting the common belief that prioritizing oneself, being number one, is the key to happiness. This perspective advocates for a life where spiritual awareness permeates all aspects, including mundane activities. In summary, the conversation weaves through various aspects of spiritual practice, emphasizing the balance between physical comfort and spiritual focus, the role of karma, different methods of spiritual advancement, the challenges of verbal communication in conveying spiritual truths, and the importance of living a conscious, compassionate life. Omnipresence and compassion. The discussion begins with the idea of seeing oneself in everyone else, leading to a sense of omnipresence and compassion. When one recognizes that their self is the self of all, the suffering of any being becomes a personal experience. This viewpoint differs slightly from certain Buddhist teachings, where a bodhisattva delays their own enlightenment until all beings are enlightened. In contrast, the approach discussed here emphasizes individual realization as a means to understanding the collective self. Observing thoughts and the role of the mind. The concept of observing thoughts is explored, highlighting the difference between active watching and passive observing. When one merely observes without the belief that they are the one doing the observing, there is no action or ego involved. This subtle distinction points to using the mind as a tool to transcend the mind itself. Dissolving the ego and surrender. The conversation shifts to the idea of surrender, either to a higher power or to the process of self-observation. Letting go of ego and personal attachments is seen as crucial in this journey. Surrender is not about passivity but about an active relinquishment of control and a trust in a higher process or consciousness. The challenge of letting go and acceptance. The difficulties of letting go and accepting things as they are, including physical discomfort or emotional pain, are acknowledged. The practice of self-awareness and mindfulness is not always straightforward and can be challenging, especially when dealing with strong emotions or physical sensations. Sleep as a form of letting go. Sleep is discussed as a form of surrender and letting go, but also as a potential escape mechanism. The importance of not fighting one's natural responses, like the need to sleep, is emphasized. However, there is also an acknowledgement that sleep can be a way to avoid dealing with issues, suggesting a balance needs to be struck. Continuous observation and detachment. The importance of continuous observation and detachment, even in the face of fear or discomfort, is underscored. This continuous awareness, without trying to change or escape the feeling, allows for a deeper understanding and acceptance of one's experiences and reactions. Summary. In essence, this dialogue encapsulates the essence of a spiritual journey that is deeply personal yet universally connected. It touches upon the nuances of self-awareness, the role of the ego, the practice of surrender and mindfulness, and the continuous process of observation and detachment. The underlying message is one of interconnectedness and compassion, where individual realization contributes to a collective understanding and empathy. The divine drama and individual experiences. The discussion starts with a reflection on the biblical phrase, "I am the vine, ye are the branches," and its interpretation in the context of individual spiritual journeys. It suggested that the unique experiences of each individual are significant in the relative world and that these experiences contribute to the divine drama of realization. However, this view is balanced with the understanding that in the absolute or non-dual perspective, these individual dramas are part of a larger, unified existence. Surrender and devotion. The concept of self-surrender and devotion is explored as a path to self-realization. It's proposed that if one surrenders completely to God and lives life with devotion, accepting all experiences and actions as they come, then this surrender will lead to purification and spiritual growth. This process is likened to a pail of dirty water being gradually cleansed by raindrops, symbolizing the gradual purification of the self through surrender. The duality and non-duality in spiritual understanding. The conversation also touches upon the dualistic and non-dualistic understandings of God and self. In the dualistic perspective, there is a distinction between self and God, symbolized by the tree and branches analogy. In non-duality, however, the distinction collapses, and one realizes that they are both the tree and the branches, they are God. This shift from a dualistic to a non-dualistic perspective represents a significant transformation in spiritual understanding. Watching versus acceptance. There's a nuanced discussion about the difference between watching and accepting. Watching is presented as a more detached way of observing experiences without affirming the ego, as opposed to accepting, which implies an acceptor. This distinction underscores the subtle ways in which ego can manifest, even in spiritual practices. The role of the play, Lila, in self-understanding. The dialogue concludes with an interesting perspective on the concept of play, Lila, in spirituality. It suggested that the play, with all its actors and actions, is a way for the divine to understand itself better. Through the diverse experiences of the play, the divine, or the self, comes to a deeper understanding and realization post the play's conclusion. Summary. This rich exchange reflects the complexity and depth of spiritual exploration, weaving together themes of individual journey, divine drama, the process of surrender, the duality and non-duality in spiritual understanding, and the transformative nature of spiritual practice. It illustrates how spiritual concepts can be understood differently depending on one's perspective and stage in the spiritual journey. The Wheel of Rebirth and Duality. The conversation touches on the Buddhist concept of escaping the cycle of rebirth, or getting off the wheel. It's explained that as long as one believes in duality and perceives God as an entity separate from oneself, they remain caught in the endless cycle of rebirth. God is both separate and integral. The notion is proposed that while God's projections, or manifestations, are part of the play of the universe, God's essence is apart from it. This view suggests that even though God is involved in the cosmic play, the divine essence remains unchanged and is never on the wheel of rebirth. Surrender to God and self-realization. The discussion then shifts to the concept of surrendering to God. It's highlighted that while this can sound like acknowledging a God outside oneself, true surrender is actually to one's own self. This is because, in non-duality, there is no separation between the individual and the divine. Devotion and knowledge in spiritual practice. The dialogue acknowledges the coexistence of devotional and knowledge-based paths in spiritual practice. It suggested that one can feel devotion and surrender to God while understanding that this God is not a separate being but an aspect of one's own self. Non-duality in devotional practices. The idea that devotional practices like worshipping deities, e.g., Kali, as done by Ramakrishna, can lead to self-realization is discussed. It's emphasized that such practices, while seemingly dualistic, can lead to non-dual realization if the practitioner understands the deity as not separate from themselves. The role of false imagination. Towards the end, the concept of false imagination is revisited, underscoring the idea that conflicts and separations are often creations of the mind. The realization that everything is one and that perceived conflicts are illusory is considered a step towards true understanding. Summary. This part of the dialogue encapsulates the complexities of spiritual paths, highlighting how different practices and beliefs, whether they appear dualistic or non-dualistic, can converge towards the same goal of self-realization. It underscores the importance of understanding the deeper non-dual nature of these practices and the role of personal perception and imagination in shaping one's spiritual self-inquiry as a form of surrender. The conversation delves into the idea that self-inquiry, a method of questioning and understanding one's true nature, is a form of surrender. It's suggested that intense self-inquiry involves surrendering the ego, and that pure devotion can naturally lead into self-inquiry. This reinforces the idea that different spiritual practices, whether devotion or inquiry, ultimately converge in their core purpose of transcending ego and realizing the self. The universal nature of spiritual truths. A question is raised about the apparent decline of Eastern mysticism in Asian countries, with a shift towards westernization and materialism. The response is that spiritual truth is eternal and doesn't die out, it's only the outward manifestations that change over time. The focus is redirected towards the importance of individual spiritual practice rather than the state of the world's spirituality. Personal evolution and worldly interests. There's a discussion about how personal interests and social activities change as one's consciousness evolves. It's noted that as one progresses spiritually, they may become less interested in certain social obligations or activities, which is a natural part of spiritual growth. Being present and mindful in everyday life. The dialogue also touches on the experience of being present and mindful in everyday situations, like attending a wedding. It's emphasized that being present doesn't necessarily mean one has a strong interest or emotional investment in the event, but rather that they are fully mindful and engaged when participating. The state of just being. The discussion concludes with an emphasis on the state of just being, where one doesn't overly concern themselves with being selective, active, or passive in social obligations. It suggests a state of non-attachment and acceptance, where things happen naturally without excessive deliberation or concern. Summary. This conversation emphasizes the interconnectedness of different spiritual paths and practices, the transient nature of worldly concerns and interests, and the significance of personal spiritual growth. It highlights the importance of focusing on one's own spiritual journey and understanding, and the natural changes that occur in one's life as a result of this journey. The ultimate goal is portrayed as a state of just being, where actions and reactions are natural and unforced, aligning with the deeper understanding of one's true nature. Decision-making and non-attachment. The conversation examines how decision-making can be influenced by non-attachment. The idea presented is that when one doesn't engage in a mental struggle over decisions, the right decision naturally emerges. This approach reflects a state of being in the flow of life, where actions and decisions arise naturally without the interference of the ego or overthinking. The process of selectiveness. The discussion around being selective or non-selective highlights the idea that true non-attachment isn't about being indiscriminate or passive, but about being in a state of equanimity regardless of the choices made. It's suggested that as one evolves spiritually, the process of selection becomes more natural and less of a struggle. Physical comforts and austerity. There's a debate about whether providing comforts to the body, like using a fan, encourages the body to desire more pleasure, which could be seen as feeding the ego. This point is contrasted with the perspective that austerity or denying the body its comforts is still an action of the ego, as it's the ego that either seeks pleasure or practices denial. The role of austerity in different traditions. The discussion touches on the role of austerity in various spiritual traditions. It's noted that while austerity is practiced to discipline the body and mind, it's still important to understand the underlying intention. Is it a genuine practice of non-attachment, or is it another form of ego expression? Spiritual practice in the world. The conversation then pivots to the idea that being engaged in the world, with all its comforts and distractions, can also be a path of spiritual practice. The key is not whether one lives a life of austerity or indulgence, but whether they can maintain a state of non-attachment and awareness in whichever path they choose. The razor's edge of physical existence. There's an acknowledgement that while living in the physical world, some attention must be paid to the body's needs. However, it's emphasized that in the course of spiritual practice, the body and its needs will be naturally taken care of without becoming a central focus or source of attachment. Summary. This part of the dialogue reflects the nuanced understanding of spiritual practice and living in the world. It suggests that true spiritual practice is about the state of one's mind and consciousness, rather than the external conditions or choices one makes. Whether one chooses a life of austerity or engages in the world's comforts, the key is maintaining awareness, non-attachment, and understanding the true nature of the self. The effect of non-duality on daily life. The discussion touches on the potential impact of non-dualistic teachings on everyday activities and responsibilities. The concern is raised that if one fully embraces the idea that there's no individual self to whom events occur, it might lead to a lack of engagement or motivation in daily tasks, such as work. The misinterpretation of self-inquiry. There's a suggestion that a misunderstanding or superficial application of self-inquiry might result in apathy or withdrawal from worldly responsibilities. This highlights the potential danger of misapplying spiritual teachings without a deep understanding or experience of their true essence. The role of mindfulness and engagement. The conversation also explores how mindfulness and engagement in activities can change one's perspective on work and other duties. Instead of seeing tasks as burdensome or meaningless, a mindful approach can transform these activities into opportunities for presence and awareness. The paradox of pleasure and austerity. The debate about the fan, symbolizing physical comfort, serves as a metaphor for the broader spiritual question of pleasure versus austerity. The point is made that whether one indulges in comforts or practices austerity, both can be expressions of the ego, seeking pleasure or demonstrating self-control. The importance of working on oneself. The key message reiterated is the importance of personal spiritual work. It's emphasized that real change comes from internal transformation rather than trying to change external circumstances. True spiritual practice is expected to lead to greater engagement and productivity in life, not less. The relativity of the world and spiritual growth. Finally, there's an acknowledgement of the changing nature of the relative world and the importance of adaptability. However, The ultimate goal is presented as focusing on self-transformation rather than trying to adapt to or change the external world. Summary. This part of the dialogue encapsulates the challenge of integrating profound spiritual insights into the practicalities of everyday life. It highlights the need for a deep understanding of spiritual teachings to avoid misinterpretation or misapplication, and the importance of internal transformation over external changes. The conversation underscores the complexity of balancing spiritual practices with worldly responsibilities and the continuous journey of self-inquiry and mindfulness.